So we have a power and efficiency charge controller example. Um, a number of installers, including myself, don't prioritize the efficiency of the components all that much. The reason is solar panels have become so cheap that efficiency losses can easily be overcome with design by oversizing the array. However, it is important to understand how efficiency comes into play, and I'm not saying that efficiency is uh, fully negligible. If the costs of the components are the same, all else being equal, the more efficient components, the better one. So, what drives efficiency? Oh, here we have two different charge controllers. Charge controller brand A is advertising a 94% or a 96% efficiency. Charge controller brand B is advertising a 98% efficiency. So let's see if we can't identify what's going on in this case. Well, here we have a PV voltage range going from 200 volts up to 550 volts. So this is a 600 volt charge controller, which is a pretty rare charge controller. Now this charge controller as well is a 600 volt charge controller. So just in an apples to apples comparison, here's a higher end charge controller, a lower end charge controller, and the higher end charge controller is 2 or 3% more efficient. And so it will result in 2 to 3% more power production, all else being equal. Now, generally, the more efficient device is the more expensive device, but that's not always true. Here we have 94% efficiency for a 24 volt battery bank and a 96% efficiency for a 48 volt battery bank. So let's think about this. The solar power is going from 600 volts all the way down to 48 volt nominal or 24 volt nominal. And what we're seeing is if it has to go that extra step, if it has the order, the absolute value difference between 648 versus 624, that larger step down to 24 volts is what's driving the efficiency. You'll get charge controllers that are not designed for 48 volt battery banks, but are instead designed for high voltage battery banks, like the Tesla Powerwall advertises a higher battery charge and discharge efficiency than this particular charge controller, because the voltage is only going from 550 volts down to 380 volts. It's not traveling as far down and potentially back up again to 120, 240. And so the overall technical analysis says the less your voltage is being converted from one voltage to another, from 600 volts down to 380 versus 48 or versus 24, the more efficient the process is. And so right now, battery banks are being designed kind of around this 48 volt standard as a matter of tradition. And I say tradition because 10 years ago, 24 volts would have been more of the standard. But what we're finding is that the larger and more powerful systems they get, a volt times an amp is a watt. So the higher your voltage, the lower your amperage. The lower your voltage, the higher the amperage. And so the amperage output to power a whole house on a 24 volt battery bank simply is not feasible. To power a whole house off a 48 volt battery bank is still very difficult. You're kind of at the maximum amount of amperage you can get with your cabling. And so I expect higher voltage platforms to be the norm. It's just they're not common. A lot of these charge controllers could run a system at a 60 volt battery bank, but then it becomes hard to find a battery inverter that can accept a 60 volt battery bank. And so we're kind of skipping the 60 volt as a standard and just going into either 48 volt or much higher inverter architecture.